It was 10 years ago, and I was 15 years old. Me and a couple of friends were staying the night at my best friend's house, and we had the house to ourselves, although we had to look after my best friend's sister, who was 3 at the time. So it was around 9 p.m. My friends all went outside to smoke, while I stayed inside to keep an eye on my best friend's sister. I was sitting on the couch with the TV to my right, and the sister was to my left on another couch facing the TV. While I was watching the TV, I suddenly felt terrified. It was a paralyzing fear, like I had come face to face with a dangerous predator. And so I looked over the 3-year-old to find she was already staring at me. And she looked just as terrified, with tears running down her face. She then looked in front of me, so I too looked where she was looking. And that's when I saw it. A couple of meters in front of me was a shadow floating just below the ceiling. My fight-flight response kicked in, and I immediately jumped the couch and ran for the back door, and completely forgetting about the little girl. I ran outside screaming for my friends. They came running, and when we ran back inside, when I got inside I saw the sister was not in the living room. And then she came running out of the hallway screaming and crying. The entity had gone. I don't know if what I saw was a demon or just an angry spirit, but the guilt of being so afraid I abandoned a 3-year-old stayed with me for a long time. And from then on, I became a superstitious person. They still live there to this day, and I don't like visiting, even though I feel no presence when I'm there. When I was little, my parents said I used to say I played with a little boy in the basement. My brother is 5 years older than me. It started when I was 6. I remember putting my shoes on with my dad to head to the gas station and looking down into the basement. At the very back where my brother's room was, there was a small dark shadow outside his door with glowing red eyes. My dad said, "Do you see it too?" We left. About a year later, I moved into the basement across hall from my brother's room. It was my first night down there. I remember waking up one day and seeing a little girl staring at me with red eyes. I was so scared, I couldn't even scream. I tried. I was crying though. My brother heard me crying and came out of his room to get me and our parents. The figure disappeared, of course. After that, I moved back upstairs next to my parents. My brother never reported seeing or hearing anything. Growing up, my household was hectic. A lot of darker energy could reside there, I think, based on what was happening there at the time. I don't feel comfortable going into it. I often escaped by PC gaming right after school and late into the night. I'd usually have headphones on one ear and off the other just in case my mom needed me or something got in the house. At this point, I heard a man's voice whenever I was in the basement. Gaming, it was speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I wonder if maybe I was making it up. The computer desk was right across the laundry room, which also had a bathroom on the other side of the laundry room. So it goes me, laundry room, bathroom. The door to the laundry room suddenly started to swing open and closed, and the light in that room would switch on and off. Sometimes I thought maybe I left the light on when I went to the bathroom. After a while, I double checked I'd turned the light off, but the door would open and the light would turn on. I asked the spirit, dumb I know, but I was about 15 at this point, to keep the light off when I go to bed. And it did. Back to Mom's house. This time, I was upstairs. Basically, we have a living room with a hallway that leads to the bedrooms. It has 3 chairs and 1 little table for cups. I was in the chair facing the hallway. It was about 3 a.m. I was gaming with my headphones on as not to bother my mama. I look up and saw this glowing gold outline that was shaped exactly like my mom. I took off my headphones and said, "Mom?" But it kept walking from the hallway, past the chairs, and through the table next to me. I don't even know why I called out to it. Obviously, people don't have a glowing gold outline, but that was just strange. Once I was at my dad's house with his new family. I lived in the room next to the parents, then my brother and my sister. The bathroom is across from my room. I had gotten back from school one day and was calling out for my stepmom. Usually she was upstairs in her room. I looked inside her room and saw a shadow of a woman with her hair in a bun, just like my stepmom's. And I walked in and started talking to my stepmom only. She wasn't in her room at all. Upstairs, toys would also go off constantly with no one there. My stepmom was pregnant, so my sister and I had to move down into the basement. We lived in a 3-story. In the basement, I got the bedroom and my stepsister got the bigger open room. There was a bathroom down there, but the hallway had mirrors on both sides of the wall completely. I'd often find big handprints on the mirrors, and I'd hear footsteps walk from my door to the hallway to the bathroom and back all night. It sounded like shuffling. One night the thing sat on the counter of my bed. I felt the pressure of it sink in the corner of my fucking bed. I can't tell you how scared I was. My sister experienced the footsteps too. Sometimes we would sleep in the same bed. She said she would see a man standing in a room. I also once saw a big handprint on my bed and a baby handprint, which I think was my baby brother. This one was the scariest to me, of my minor stories. My sister and I were on the middle floor. It was about 11 or 12 at night. We were watching a horror flick, and we look over to the left and see a dark figure of a boy standing next to the stairs. My sister pauses the movie and says, "Matt, go upstairs," in a stern voice. It doesn't move, which confirmed to me I wasn't the only one who saw it. She then says again, "Matt!" Nothing. She goes to turn on the light, and it's gone. We were spooked the fuck out. Decided to turn on a different movie. I think a kid's show, lol. This was my sophomore year of high school, living in a small Utah town at the time. And a pretty avid believer in things like this, despite not having any major experiences up until this point. I was in my weightlifting class and had to go take a piss, so I left and the only bathroom that was open was the one in the guy's locker room. So I go in and down a few steps, start playing music from my phone that I left on the bench as close to the toilets as possible, which was on the opposite side from where my backpack and jacket were. I do my business, clean up, and grab my phone before going back to the steps that led out. But around halfway there, I turned my phone off, and when I got to the steps, I felt something behind me, barely breathing down my neck, and not anything nice from what I could tell. I freaked out and ran back to the weights room as fast as I could. The rest of class, I kept an eye on the door, just in case anyone came or went so I could ask them if they felt anything like I did. But nobody left, which makes it all the more haunting when we all went back after class and my bag was on the floor and my jacket was on the other side of the room. I froze when I saw it, and it took 2 of my friends to snap me out of it. So yeah, that's probably one of my biggest anything when it comes to ghosts and stuff. Once again, this was my sophomore year, and I was in the theatre department working backstage. We were doing Beauty and the Beast and wanted to see how many people were out. And since we couldn't walk out on stage, we had to improvise. There was a large mesh speaker front attached to the wall, facing out towards the crowd that you couldn't see behind. But the only way to look through it was to climb up a ladder and led to the catwalks where someone had reportedly fallen from and died when hitting the chairs beneath. Me and a friend of mine, let's call him Jack, climbed partway up the ladder and looked out into the crowd. Full house that night. But we both decided to look up and saw the silhouette of a man's upper torso peering over the edge at us before shooting backwards out of sight. The 2 of us, reasonably, freaked out and ran down the ladder. Everyone freaked out when they saw us and asking what had happened. But we didn't have time to explain because We had to get in place to start the show. Backstory. I was never really that close to my uncle. He stayed about an hour and a half drive away, but was close enough to like him. He was awesome, but he took his own life in 2011, which was a major blow to my entire family. He was one of those guys that everyone loved. He wasn't really into religion, but also didn't knock anyone's beliefs. Main story, at my mum and dad's old place, they had a canvas picture of a Buddha hanging on the wall between their bedroom and the bathroom wall. For easiness, to try and picture it, you go to the top of the stairs and the spare room is in front of you. Small corner piece of wall, and then my mum's bedroom, large enough space for the picture, then bathroom door, then my bedroom. The picture had been hanging up for months, and my mum got bored of it, so she took it down and put up a picture of the rose. The first night was fine. The second night, there was only me in my room, my mum in bed and dad downstairs watching TV. All of a sudden, there was an almighty bang. I got up, thinking my mum had fallen out of bed again, haha. But as soon as I walked out my door, I could see the picture of the roses not on the wall, but at the top of the stairs. My first thought was I had sleptwalked, so I went into her room and she was awake. I asked if she heard the noise. She said yes. Asked what it was, so I told her. The next day, we put the Buddha picture back up, and it never dropped once. So my grandpa has this ranch about 25 miles east of Payson, Arizona. For those in Arizona, it's between Hagler Creek and the 260. It's very secluded, but the land is good for grazing. I spend a lot of time running Jersey cattle on the range. Every night one of us rides out to check on the cattle in the field and to check the fence line for holes in the wire. A few days ago, I was riding out to check on the herd at about 1:30 a.m. and I kept hearing rustling in the tree line running along the fence perimeter. Figured it was coyotes or squirrels. I see a lot of them up there. It went away every 10 or 15 minutes, and then I could hear it again. The second time I heard it, I was off my horse and walking him to a little water trough. The cows were about 150 to 200 yards away, just within my view within the moonlight. I heard the rustling again, but this time it was heavy. Me and my horse Vegas both looked up at the same time, wondering what the fuck we were hearing. At this point, I came to the eerie realization that whatever was out there was tracking me in Vegas. It didn't seem so interested in the cows. So in an attempt to scare it off, I got back on my horse and grabbed my whip and uncoiled it. I don't use it on animals, I only use it to make a loud noise to move cattle, and cracked it a few times rather than using my pistol. The rustling stopped and the forest was dead quiet once more. Not thinking much about it, I went back to count the head. I marked 38 heads. All the cows were there. I started my way back to the house. I was about 3.5 miles away. It's a bit of a trial ride to get back. It was about 10 minutes of silence until I heard the rustling again. At this point I was getting pissed. I figured it was some dumb little ass coyote thinking we were going to lead him somewhere. So I called my grandpa on my radio, there's zero service out there whatsoever, and told him I was going to find my gun so he didn't get worried. So I reached down and pulled my revolver from my side. For all you guys who like firearms, it's an Uberti replica Colt 45 Peacemaker, chambered 45 Colt. And I fired one round into the air. The rustling stopped as the shot rang out through the woods and mountains. My ears rang and the smell of gunpowder filled my nose as the smoke settled. After I calmed Vegas down, I started riding back, only for the rustling to come back 5 minutes later. I started getting really nervous at this point because usually coyotes run away when they get scared by a loud noise. I didn't have a flashlight on me because I'm dumb and I forgot. So I used my lame-ass iPhone flashlight and dismounted. I slowly walked to the tree line where I heard the rustling as I had my gun out, ready for an animal to jump at me or something. I flashed my light around through clearing in the trees, and to my right, I heard rustling about 100 feet away and turned over, and to my surprise and confusion, I saw a black silhouette of a horse run across the trail. I immediately thought, shit, is that one of our horses? That's someone else's horse? So I rode over to where I saw the horse, shaking with anxiety. I looked over and was confused as to how a horse even ran out of and into the forest because it was so thick with shrubbery. And when I looked back behind me and started riding back, I stopped frozen in fear as I got the chills. I dropped my gun and heard the sound of it hitting the ground echo through the woods, because in front of me, about 50 feet away, was the silhouette of a man wearing a flat brim hat and appeared to have chaps on. I picked up my gun and aimed at the figure, and it was gone. I got back on Vegas and rode like the wind to get out there, constantly looking behind me in fear of it following. I made it back and told my grandpa, who was trying to calm me down, and said he's had some weird experiences too. My mother went to Eastern Washington University and stayed in one of the houses the locals rented out to college students. I cannot give the exact age of the house, but it was old enough to have a built-in button on the floor that would call up to the servants in the attic, so the house was relatively old. During her studies there, she had 3 different roommates. My uncle was the first, who was then replaced by my mother's best friend, who was then replaced by my father. All 3 of them can confirm strange happenings in this house and be woken up in the middle of the night with people whispering. The worst of it was in my mother's room in the attic. My mother hated that house, but she didn't have anywhere else to live, and the dorms were expensive, so she sucked it up and lived there until she graduated. She hated sleeping alone. The air in her room constantly felt thick and heavy. Her closet was constantly freezing cold, and at night, she would hear multiple people whispering incoherent words at once. While living there, my mother had a cat named Puss who would constantly hide under the bed. One time my mother caught Puss out from under her bed, sitting, watching, and growling at one of the corners of the room. My mother went over to Puss confused at what she was looking at, until she saw a black figure in the corner slowly start to move upwards toward the ceiling. Puss started to become more aggressive, her hissing and growling getting louder, before she freaked out and shot off back under the bed, still growling at the corner until the black figure was gone. My mother had never seen Puss act like this, since Puss was usually a very lovey and happy cat, but whatever that was clearly terrified her. Sometime later, my mother was talking with a friend who was excited to be touring 2 famous paranormal investigators around the college and town, showing them and supposed haunted places. My mother brought up the fact that she has always had weird stuff happening in her house and thinks it may be haunted. Her friend got excited and begged her to let her bring in to the house. My mother refused, since she wasn't willing to stay up late for some people that she didn't even know. My mother didn't know at the time who these investigators were, since she never really kept up with paranormal stuff, believing it can let evil into your life. She only knew that they were on quite a few popular talk shows at the time. These 2 investigators were Ed and Lorraine Warrens. Around midnight, my mother's best friend comes to her and tells her that there are people at the door wanting to speak to her. Confused, my mother got in her robe and went to the front door. There, she saw her tour guide friend with 12 other students behind Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine asked my mother if they could come in, as their guide told them that it's possible her house was haunted. My mother agreed and let them all in. Lorraine asked my mother where in the house is the haunting most, and my mother told her that it was her bedroom, that she would take Ed and Lorraine there, but everyone else had to wait. They agreed, and my mother took Ed and Lorraine to her room. When my mother entered her room, she sat on her bed and asked if they could feel it, how heavy the air was. They both agreed that the air was heavy, like how some of the haunted places they've been to. Lorraine walked around the room, then to the closet, and asked if she could hear voices here. My mother broke down crying and said she could hear them every night, and then it kept her up at night. Lorraine told that it was possible that her closet is a doorway for those who passed on, or a doorway to hell. My mother continued to cry before Lorraine came over to her and told her that the reason this stuff is happening to her is because of her mom's family, that the women have some connection with those beyond, and that it's possible that they're psychics, which makes the dead attracted to her. My mother then told Lorraine about the black figure, which Lorraine told her wasn't from this house, but was connected to her family, mainly her dad's side, and that it most likely went after her grandfather, her father, and now her. The figure isn't a ghost or a demon, but something pure evil, and that it wants her. Fearful, my mother asked them if they could bless her room, which they did, and after further investigation of the house, Ed and Lorraine told her that her house was the first place that actually showed activity and signs of haunting in the whole area. After they finished blessing the house, Ed and Lorraine left. Time passed, and my mom's best friend moved out and my dad moved in. The activity in the house still continued, even after the blessing. At first, my father was skeptical of the house being haunted, until one night, while sleeping in my mom's bed, he heard the whispering. He asked my mother what she said, and she told him she didn't say anything. After a few moments of silence between them, she asked if he could hear them. Confused, my father asked what she was talking about, and she told him the whispering. He then agreed that she heard the whispering and asked where it was coming from, which he then told her it was from the closet and it happens every night. Sometime after, my father got curious about whether or not the servants button still worked. Originally, no one had ever been up into the attic. Both of my parents made their way up to the attic, but never reached the top, since on their way there, both of my parents felt like they couldn't breathe as the temperatures dropped to the freezings, and my mother started to panic as she felt like she was being choked. She quickly told my father to turn back around, because it felt as though they were not wanted up there. Not wanting to upset my mother more, my father turned back and never went up there again. Once my mother graduated college, they moved out of the house and strange events continued to occur, no matter where they moved. Around the time I was born, my parents lived in a rather small house with my two older brothers. Constantly, our cats would freak out, growling and hissing at the corners of the house. Not only that, but my mother would constantly see this black figure around the house. Later, my family had our new house constructed and we moved out of our old one. These strange events followed us and got worse. One day, when I was around 5, I was walking outside my room to walk downstairs. The moment I walked to the balcony, I felt someone grab my arm extremely roughly. I turned around and I just see a black figure holding my arm. I screamed for my mother. She came running upstairs and she sees the black figure. She grabs my arm and tries to pull me away, but the figure wouldn't let go. She pulled as hard as she could and ripped me away from the figure. As she does, the figure disappears and a giant hand mark is left on my arm. My mother runs downstairs and screams at my father to get my brothers, and that they're leaving the house until it's blessed. We later had a priest come to our house and bless it. Afterward, the activity stopped, but growing up, me and my second older brother would constantly have nightmares of this figure in our dreams, doing awful things to us, but it had bright red eyes and would chase us. Nothing else has happened since then, and I still live in the house. Every once in a while, I get this sudden fear from the staircase. I never go downstairs at night without the lights on, out of fear of this thing that's possibly still there. I'd spoken to my mother about the dreams and stuff that happened to her, but she tries to avoid talking about it, since she believes the more we talk about it, the more it will come back. She's told me that though she spoke with my grandfather about this figure, who refused to talk about it since the first time she brought it up, he went pale as a ghost. He said that the figure used to torment him as a child, and his dad would tell him about the figure and how it would come for him, as it did with him. My mother didn't realise that it was Ed and Lorraine Warren until we were watching a documentary about them, and she points out that they were the ones who came to our house. I was speechless, and she was confused as I told her that they were the Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators, that they were the ones who started publicly doing investigations, and there are famous horror movies that involve them. My mother freaks out and tells my father about it, and while my father was shocked, he didn't think much of it. I apologise if my story is a little all over the place, but this was my best attempt to explain my mother's story and my experience, since my mother doesn't like to talk about it, much out of fear. Back in 2000, when I was 20, a friend of mine, female 19, decided she wanted to get an apartment and asked if I'd be her roommate. I didn't need a place to stay, but decided we'd do it anyway. We moved to a nice apartment complex right next to and behind the house where my aunt saw her dead ex-boyfriend. The place was nice and newer, so the thought of it being haunted never crossed my mind. I didn't even experience anything until my roommate got homesick a month in and had to move back in with her folks, leaving me there alone for about 3 months. It started with the lights coming on by themselves. I would go to bed, always turning the lights off and always closing my bedroom door. I was meticulous about the lights because that's how I was raised. I'd go to bed and at some point my eyes would see light coming in under the door. I thought my roommate came home, so I get out of bed excited to see her, only to discover I was still alone and the dining room or bathroom lights would be on. Then the knocking started. Right after I'd lay down, there would be 3 loud knocks on my bedroom door. Again, I'd think my roommate had come home. I'd get up to greet her, only to see I was still alone. A week or so before Christmas, my roommate and I went out gift shopping and went back to the apartment to wrap everything. When we were done, we were both standing at the door, checking to see if we had everything before leaving. The apartment was completely quiet, and we heard this clearly. My acoustic guitar, which I had leaning up against my wall in the bedroom, with the pick stuck between 3 strings, was plucked, each string in succession, and slid along the wall until hitting the floor. We just looked at each other, then walked to my bedroom to find the guitar on the floor, with the pick still stuck between the strings. Those strings had been plucked, meaning the pick had been used, and then replaced when done. At Christmas, during a party with her and some other friends at the apartment, the VCR turned itself off. It did that 1 or 2 other times while living there, never before or after. For Christmas, my girlfriend got me a guitar tablature book for Pink Floyd's The Wall. One night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom learning how to play a song from it. When I was done, I put the pick in the strings and set my guitar up on the wall. But instead of closing the book as I normally did, I left it open and went to bed. Just after laying down, I heard the pages in the book flipping on their own. It was a thick book, but the song I had been learning was somewhere in the middle. I figured the weight of the pages made it change pages on its own. But when they stopped flicking, I got curious and got up to look. The pages stopped flipping on the song Hey You, and when I read the title, I got chills and shut the book, pleaded with the ghost to let me sleep, and I went back to bed. While laying there, I realised if the pages had flipped on their own from the weight, they would have gone the other way, away from that song. After that, I started calling the ghost Pink. Anytime something happened, I would just say, "Oh, hey Pink." But one night, I'd been out with a friend until about 2 a.m, and when I opened my door and stepped in, I could feel the ghost standing there. I said, "Oh, hi Pink," and I could feel the energy go through me and out of the apartment. So that's when I figured it didn't like being called that, which didn't stop me from saying it. Shortly after my roommate came back and stayed the rest of the lease, not much happened then. I figured if an entire house could be haunted, then surely an entire apartment or building could be. I wanted to ask my neighbours if they ever experienced anything, but I never did, and actually never really talked to them at all. And to answer some questions before they happen, my roommate and I are still really good friends. Never dated, never slept together. She was also really good friends with my girlfriend, and it was my girlfriend who told her to ask me to move in with. Also, I've known since I was around 10 or so that I could feel ghosts, but usually only when standing right there where they were. If I stand with them long enough, I usually get an image in my head of what they look like, as well as their mood. In a few instances, I've had them communicate with me like that, their words coming to me as thoughts or images, usually the latter. I usually don't tell people this because they usually don't believe me, and I'd just rather not go through with the ridicule and the name calling. However, with Pink, I never figured out who or what it was. I always felt that it was male, but I'm not sure. I still wonder about it from time to time. My wife used to work at the Great Wolf Lodge in Mason, Ohio. She worked third shift at the front desk for 5 years, and things would happen there constantly. Many times I would take her to work and hang out in the lobby until she got off, instead of making the long drive back home and then back to get her in the morning. Employees she worked with would share stories with me all the time of things that happened to them or to the guests. One room in particular that seems to be the most haunted had reports from guests that something in the middle of the night would jump on their beds. One day, the bathtub overflowed and the water leaked down into the basement. When they checked the room, nobody had been in there, and the room hadn't been rented. It seemed as if a lot of the things that happened there either happened in the lobby or on the first floor. The lobby and the main floor are actually the second floor. Every night they had to print a report and get it from the main office on the first floor. My wife went down the stairs, and while she walked, the elevator started following her from the lobby to the first floor. When she got down there, the doors to it opened, and nobody was on it, nor was there anybody waiting for it. Another night she had to get the report and was waiting at the doors for the elevator. Behind her, she heard a man say, "You never asked my name." She spun around, but nobody was there. She walked down the halls and found nobody with her anywhere. One night she got a call from the office, but nobody was supposed to be in there, and it was locked at night. The night shift supervisor went down to check it out with security and found the door to still be locked and nobody in there. That happened quite a bit. One time he came back upstairs from checking, and as soon as he reached the top of the stairs, a phone that sat on the host station at one of the restaurants there rang, so he picked it up. The extension it called from was the office, and he heard nothing but dead air, pardon the pun. A religious man and skeptic, he just laughed it off as he always did, and hung up the phone with a shrug. Another night, she got a call from an extension she didn't recognise, and when she answered it, she heard nothing but dead air. Not even her supervisor knew the extension. After hanging up, she decided to call the extension back, and the phone in front of her supervisor, who sat right next to her at the desk, rang. He picked it up, and they confirmed that it was her that called. Except it wasn't his extension at all, and upon further investigation, they found that extension did not exist anywhere in the hotel. One night I had to use the bathroom, so I walked down the hall off the lobby to the bathroom. As I got it, I looked up and saw someone walking in ahead of me. All I saw was their leg from about the knee down. It appeared to be a white guy, red shorts, white socks and red shoes. I was only a few feet away, yet nobody had been in front of me in the hall, and as I went into the bathroom, I didn't see him. So I looked in each stall and found I was alone. There was absolutely nowhere for him to go. Another night, sometime around Halloween, they had the lobby all decorated, and there was a DJ booth. Right around 4:45 in the morning, it began playing a song really loud and scared the hell out of all of us. The supervisor went to shut it off, and after he did, he informed us that it had been off when he came in. I mean, it had been off the whole time I was there too. The place is right next to Kings Island, which is supposed to be haunted, and ghost hunters did a show from there once and found nothing. I'm not sure why they never bothered going to the lodge next door to hunt. They'd probably turn up all kinds of things, and stuff happens regularly there. Maybe the company doesn't want that kind of publicity. Guess I ruined that. Should you ever happen to do some hunting, things seem to happen mostly between 3 and 5 in the morning.